and the passion play, crumbling away. I'm your source of self-destruction. Veins are pumped with fear, sucking dark is clear, bleeding on your death's construction. Taste me, you will see, more is all you need, dedicated to how I'm killing you.
Beautiful.
I'm gonna stop there.
That's, you know what?
That was awesome. Welcome to UberCube, episode 100. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and today I am joined by my other two amazing hosts, starting with the one that's always the most amazing.
Hi, it's me, a magic, also known as May.
And Stu.
And we have for you a little bit of an indulgent episode where we're going to kind of talk about the origin stories. I know our good friend Sam kind of talked to me last week and says, please, for the love of God, don't make this one of those episodes where you just play a bunch of riff tracks and clips. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to play a few riff tracks and clips, but we're going to have a little bit of added benefit. We've got some fan questions. We've got some questions that we think might be interesting to the audience and kind of about the origin story of the UberCube. But before we get into that, we're actually going to have a word from our sponsor.
It's me, Sloppity Ballpiper. For 3 colours and a black, you get a creature, demon. Don't you know, I'm a free. And I got jolly gut pipes till you tap me, sacrifice a creature, and the next creature got you cuss his turn as Cascade.
Well, thank you very much, Sloppity Ball Piper, for getting in there and supporting the show. All right, let's move over to the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. Let's start out with the lovely May. What are you having on this delightful Friday afternoon?
Agua. Water.
Not a bad choice. It's kind of early. We're recording this at an earlier time than we usually would. But that doesn't normally stop Anthony and I when we get together. So we're going to have some 15-year Glenfiddich.
Single malt.
As a little celebration.
Let's celebrate.
I'm going to go ahead and pour that right now.
All right, so while Stu pours our lovely libations that he's held back for us, let's kind of start out with the origin story of the UberCube. Just like every fantastical story in history, we're going to cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Beautiful.
May.
Cheers, May.
So how did this idea come to fruition? Well, I was chomping at the bit for the longest time with all this excess energy that the listeners may have caught on to and my artistic energy that I needed to put somewhere. And I was kind of talking to our good friend Samich, who's been on the show, obviously, multiple times. And we were talking about, hey, perhaps we should run a YouTube channel, something where we could talk about all these cube ideas. Just because, just like a lot of other cube enthusiasts, after the post-play, you talk about what went right, what went wrong, all the things you learned about it, interesting dynamic plays, all the things, right? Just that trial and error conversation comes about, like, why in the heck would you run this card? Would you agree, Stu?
I think I love our content, right? I've always loved the way that we speak about Cube. I love the way that we enthuse our passion for Cube in the episodes that we do. And I think just the content that we do is very podcast centric. YouTube or recording videos for whatever medium, I think that there's definitely styles of content that obviously just fit very, very well. Now, obviously, if you're sharing gameplay, you're going to need to have a video showing what's going on, right? Or if you need any kind of visual representation of what you're doing, then obviously doing a YouTube channel is a good idea. But what we've done has always fit very well to a podcast, right? That way, it's all about the content. It's all about the audio, if you will. And no one has to look at us, which is like an added benefit.
Yeah, there is that benefit. And it ultimately came down to, being frank with you, it came down to the time factor, right?
Yes.
Video editing is real. May, you have experience with that. It's very it's very time consuming, right? And I'm an engineer. Stu is a I don't know what Stu does for a living, but Stu shows up here at the podcast.
Yeah, let's just say that. I'm a part-time podcaster. We'll leave it at that.
And May, you're busy, and we all have to kind of have this time, and I produce these episodes pretty rapidly. I mean, we oftentimes record on a Friday, and I roll them out by Monday morning's recording, right? So drinking my coffee on a Saturday morning before the rooster crows, and generally I've got the episode composed, done, ready to lock and load, write some cool little script about like what the synopsis is, and bada boom, bada bing, you've got an episode.
Yep.
It's fun. So we just wanted somewhere to put the energy, and this was podcasting was kind of the perfect outlet. Stu and I would oftentimes sit on the back porch, and we'd talk to the wee hours, delirium, talking about magic theory and concepts, and just what he thought about our cube, and it would just ramble on and on and on. And we're like, holy cow, why are we not recording this?
And that was kind of the birth of it. Is one day Anthony came to me and he said, I would like to do a podcast about Cube. And I said, okay, the first time someone comes and says something like that, you're thinking, okay, that's a cool idea, whatever. I didn't necessarily brush it off, but I just thought, okay, if that's something you want to do. And then he came to me again and he said, no, seriously, I want to do this podcast. I said, okay, well, I mean, that sounds cool and everything. And he said, I think it would be good for us to do it together. Like you say, we spend a lot of time just sitting out on my back porch, talking about Magic, talking about Cube, we've talked about Commando, we've talked about Cube, we've talked about 60 card, we've talked about lore, we've talked about anything that's Magic associated. But obviously, you being a Cube aficionado and a Cube sort of passionate about Cube, that was where you wanted the content, the real crux of the content to be geared in that direction. And that was kind of it. And the next time you showed up, it was, hey, I've got this script episode. Do you want to go ahead and just start recording this podcast? Thought, well, okay, let's go. We didn't really have the level of technical prowess that maybe we do nowadays, and we obviously didn't have the wonderful May back then. Shame on us.
Speaking of which, the May was the completing the Triforce, the trifecta. It's what I feel really
the triumvirate.
It brought us together. It really fixed some of the things. Right, Stu and I have amazing flow, but May really interjects. Like, I felt like the one thing we were missing is, and it's specifically towards May, is she has like this really intrinsic knowledge of facts and lore about the game, right? Like she knows, a lot of story elements. Whereas I'm talking about, that card that has a goblin on it that hits you for 2. And man, the minute I saw the fake cube, it was our good friend Jordan Eckenrode that had posted up a video featuring your cube. I was in love with the sight of the cube, and I'm like, I have to meet this person. Like, I put it on my things to do, like, no matter what, because it just fascinated me. May, do you remember when you first came on the show, what that was like? You were a guest the first time, and I'm like, no, you're no longer a guest. We are bringing you on permanent.
So we actually ended up coming back for a few episodes until eventually y'all were like, why are you not just part of the team?
It was too easy.
It was that simple. It was like, why aren't you just on it with us every episode? And May was like, yes, I probably should be, because you guys really need me on this podcast. And that was that, right? That was the triumvirate, the trifecta, like you say, the Triforce. That was that. And I mean, that's a long time ago now. Like, this is our 100th episode. We weren't doing it for really that long before May enriched us with her presence.
No, it was just a conversation. It immediately flowed, May.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, it just felt so natural.
I'm being flattered. And I'm not sure how to take it.
Yeah, you're going to have to take it. It was like old friends. I mean, we had met her a few times online, and it's just like the three of us just hit it off, and the flow, and just picking up the cues and understanding everybody's what they did right and what they did wrong and the flaws and where to pick up the conversation and when they were, the struggle. And because podcasting, it's not hard, but it can be hard. And May was really attuned to some of those levels of where we were at with our headspace while we're talking. She could always tell, like, when I was personally fumbling or I'm talking about a subject and maybe I'm stuttering or maybe I'm having a bad day. May just knew to grab it and take that football and run she just took it and ran. It was amazing. It was so natural. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, now we've got this permanent bond, despite the podcast, the three of us are now the triumvirate, as you might call it. It's pretty great. May, I'm going to start out asking you.
Sure.
So, this is a highlight question. And we've done a lot of episodes, and at this point, it's been I record and I edit and I listen to these all the time, but it's been a high-speed blur. Do you have an episode that really spoke to you, or a conversation that really just, I guess, tugged at your heartstrings, etc.?
I mean, one that I think about a lot is Uvenwald oddity discussion. That one's always a fun one to think about.
You were thinking about like that day Anthony was right and you two were wrong. Is that what that really distilled down to? Are we still there? Are we still there?
We're never gonna be there.
Anyways, I'm trying to think of like my other favorite kind of moments that we've had on the show, because we've had a lot of good moments where it's just been us talking about something that we're passionate about that particular subject. But sometimes it feels like we just had those moments where it was the light bulb finally going off over your head.
Yeah.
Where it feels like things are starting to click. And
Yeah.
I always love those moments, and we have so many of them that it's hard to pick one.
I would agree with that. You call it the aha moments whenever you see one of the people on the show suddenly get an idea, like a concept. Like recently we talked about gut, and you've been making this compelling case for so long. You've stated it as we talked about, but then you get to see me as a curator finally like take that piece of knowledge, that little nugget that you've been passing, and now I'm like, oh yeah, he finally gets it. Cool. Like that has a level of rewarding. We have a conversation. Even going back to the Uvenwald oddity, we're going back and we're having this mild discourse. It's always like a cool little debate conversation that flows amongst us.
And that's, I think, what makes it so enjoyable, I would say, for me, because this isn't a necessarily let's sit down and do a podcast and it's kind of a unique experience. To me, this is kind of a continuation of just those back porch conversations that we used to have, right? Where we either played or not played or whatever. And it was just hanging out with friends and talking about something that I was interested in. And it's just been that, like I say, it's been that continuation of that vibe, which has been so enjoyable.
And I had this one episode in particular, and I was going to tell myself that I wasn't going to talk about this, but there's this one episode where this podcast really helped me more than ever helped. I had a tragedy that happened during CubeCon #1, and I really don't want to go into those details, but during that situation, I needed a distraction. And this is an awful episode. This is our Halloween special. And it's mostly because I needed my friends at the time to distract me and get my mind off of the subject. And oh my gosh, did they, in fact. I mean, we were probably had a little bit too much of the libations that day because of what had occurred. And my friends had been there for me all day. And I said, no, we're going to record. And we set up in our hotel room at CubeCon 2022 at the Home 2 Suites at the time. Just the worst setup you could imagine. And we put the mics in front of our faces and we just started recording. And just for that moment, this podcast gave me like that needed energy to not think about the situation that was happening on that particular day.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal to me. It was a big deal.
It was.
And so the podcast means to a lot to me on a lot of levels. If you had to ask me a host highlights, that's my worst show and my best show all in one, right?
And in a certain degree, that episode was your magnum opus.
It's a from the heart. It was, like you say, it was not something that you want or expect to have to go through when you're attending an event like that. You get some bad news, but it was a great coming together, I felt, for us, not just for you and I, but for you and I and Christian, and a real coming together because it was something that a lot of people at the event found out about. And the support that we got, well, the support that you got, the support that Anthony got, the kind words, and that camaraderie that we had at that time was something that I'll never forget. That was a real, it's such a shame. Humanity seems to do a good job of that, right? Using the tragedies to kind of bring out the best in ourselves sometimes.
Yeah.
But that was a real best of us kind of moment. And as much as tragic as it was, like you say, it was a best of us because it was just such a wonderful moment, I feel, as for us in our friendship.
I need a second. I'll get it back.
Take your time.
I'll get it back in a second.
Take your time.
And switching gears on that entirely, as far as a host highlight, and we'll go back to the silly parts because we're not here to do that. But like when we decided to kind of let loose and not care about what the world always thought, right? Like I don't wrap myself around the headspace of internet reviews and all that, right? Like I want our listeners to truly enjoy themselves, right? But at the same time, sometimes we want to do stuff a little bit indulgent, like this particular episode. We want to talk about this. We did a Christmas special with our good friend Nathan. and he just brought. He's a voice actor by nature, right? That's his passion, right? And we did this entire silly cube design based around Rudolph. What if Rudolph was a cube? And I highly recommend listening to this episode. It's absolute nonsense. You're not going to get anything out of it as far as the
insight.
Yeah, no insight. You're not going to come out of this but what you can get is the creativity when you get people to do artistic expression.
I think that's important as well, to have some kind of fun aspects, and we always try and have fun. For every episode, there's always an element that the fun that we try and inject in there. But that one was just no substance whatsoever. No. Let's talk about this card. Let's talk about this archetype. No, it was just like, let's goof around for an hour and talk about Christmas and Rudolph and just go nuts.
May, do you remember a host highlight? Do you have a host highlight in particular, one that really just sticks out to you? Like, you kind of close it off with, you had the Uvenwald oddity and all that. That's pretty much, you've had the first time you came on the show. Anything in particular sticks out to you that made you laugh, made you cry, all the above?
Whew. Moments that made me laugh, made me cry, whatever. Well, I did really enjoy doing the FemCube episode and being able to talk passionately about this type of cube and representation and whatnot, and those are things that I care about, and having the opportunity to actually talk about that was an episode I cared about. So I would think that episode with Emma Partlow was just easily one of my favorite moments of us recording.
That I will agree, and what I loved about that is that could have quite easily turned into the roast of Uber Bear, right? And in some regards, Anthony did take a bit of a hard time, right, from May and from Emma, as far as some of those choices, but in my opinion, it was a honest, thoughtful, legitimately, like I say, thoughtful feedback from two very, very strong cube aficionados, experts, and to give some real awesome, not just awesome feedback about the cube, which is wonderful, but just to offer some perspective to us in a way that, we're not going to get as necessarily as men or as cube people, right? And I think that was really cool. That to me will always stick out as a favorite of mine.
It was my most cringe episode. I think they enjoyed me. They kind of wrapped up the episode. Well, I enjoyed watching Anthony squirm for an hour and a half, but it was, as we knew, it was a learning experience. And the listeners wouldn't know this, but that was actually a lost episode because we had, in fact, pre-recorded that. We knew that this topic was a topic that required special care, right? Like a lot of attention, and we had to be mindful of, the words we chose, etc., right? Because there was a certain air of sensitivity and discomfort, especially from the two, Stu and I in particular, sitting in the room, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we wanted that third party, that totally objective response to it. And Emma came in just honest and raw and saying what she thought, and she had no preordained bias about the idea, and I just spoke wildly and candidly, and I actually enjoyed it, but at the same time loathed it because people don't like to be disarmed. That's a fair thing, right?
Yeah.
No one likes to be vulnerable. Not really. Not intentionally.
Yeah, that's the word.
It's why I like it. It was a very honest episode that really showed, growth and passion and lots of different emotions in it, and it was great.
And what it also has done is Emma was incredible. If we're also talking about guests, I loved having Vince on. Pleasant Canada.
You stole mine. I loved having Vince on too.
I was really tempted to pick Vince.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard not to, right? Because the subject matter was so interesting. But it just really does go to show how superior British people are when it comes to any kind of podcast recording, any kind of content. Right. I mean, how can you argue against that?
I'm going to throw out JP too. JP is always a good guest. We got a few people. Some people, we've got friends that some people do this more often than not, so they're more comfortable behind a mic because putting your face in front of a mic and expressing your thoughts. We just had our good friend Sam McKenna on recently. And we were talking about this kind of post. He's like, I guess I didn't know if I'd like the sound of my own voice. I'm like, I get it. What you got to think about is May, Stu, and I are friends. This is a safe space. You don't need to think about the fact that I'm going to transmit this to an international audience.
Tens of listeners.
Dozens of us. Do not put that in your headspace, right? Just talk to friends. And when you bring these guests on, the ones that do it more, they have more of acuity in that idea, right? And that's fair because they do it more frequently, and you can tell who does and who doesn't. But I also enjoy getting the people on that have never done it before, and I have to nudge them a little bit. Like our good friend Greg, he actually gave me a final response after his episode, and he said, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, right? Because I'm like, dude, you're just talking to friends. That's what you do when you have a mic in front of you.
And I will say that's so. I work in cybersecurity, and sitting in front of a camera and a microphone, and I work remotely, so it's a lot of team stuff. I'm comfortable, and it's something I do from time to time. Is sitting there and talking in front of a group of sometimes 100+ people. It's never bothered me. Public speaking, getting on stage, talking or singing even. I've done karaoke a gazillion times. That kind of stuff has never bothered me. I can certainly understand there's a lot of people out there that public speaking is just, they'd rather drop dead than have to do that. But like you say, you're sitting here, there's a camera. Sure, we're sitting here hanging out with May, and there's a camera and there's a mic, but the only person that's really listening to you is yourself.
Yep, and through the power of editing, I'll fix all your ums and ahs.
Well done, Anthony.
May, do you have a particular guest that you enjoyed very much? Aside from Emma, which you declared.
Yeah. Emma and Vince were the two main ones that I was thinking of. Both have already been mentioned.
So tell us what, and I will say, like, that was kind of a low-hanging fruit in a way, but
yeah.
And not that we're just going to turn this into the why May is so awesome, even though it would be easy to do so. But May, having you on and then becoming a co-host, that to me is like our raison d'etre, maybe, for
I would agree with that,
right? Because you have enriched the podcast so much, and I will say that I have learned so much. I learned a lot from Anthony, and I know I try not to blow his ego up too much, but I've learned so much from both of you about Cube and about process and about curation and the thoughts and all that kind of stuff. So that's been incredibly valuable to me over the time. And I'm still working on this Cube that I've been dragging along for about 5 years now. But I feel like I'm better prepared to do that now because of having this podcast and because I get to interact with you.
And I'll throw this in there too, and this is in regards to May. I've received compliments. Like, our show was good. It was listenable. But frankly, May brought the conversation, made it gel more. Because, again, she understands when we're hobbling, or when we can't remember a card, or where I'm struggling to talk about where this dragon is from. She just, without any resources in front of her, just seems to plug that in so eloquently. And that's what I adore. She can read. She's in another room. I'm going to say she can read the room. She's reading the room through a webcam and reads the room. That's a whole nother gift. She can tell when we're falling on our knees and we can't figure out what we're doing. She'll just pick it up and go.
I'm always doing
That's a gift.
Like, that's why I need you guys, because I'm always doing that.
Yeah. That's what's cool about having three. Sometimes I can breathe.
Let's talk. Feedback people have left for me. I think the one that has stuck with me the longest is when I got talked to and basically thanked for being the voice of reason between the three of us. And I keep thinking, oh my God, we're in trouble if I'm the voice of reason.
In regards to listener impact, that's a funny one. Said there's been any standout interactions or feedback from listeners? I mean, we've got our nice feedback. We've got our positive feedback. There was one particular conversation that happened, and I won't benchmark this with a timestamp or something like that, but May's like, never read your YouTube comments. It's bad for your mental health. And I'm like, yep. Well, my mental health is already pretty rough. I've had a pretty crappy work week. And I opened up this YouTube comment one day. And oh my God, dude, my wife's like, what's wrong with you? She's walking in the room. I'm like, my belly hurts. I can't stop laughing. And it's this individual who said, if you just want to work for WotC, why don't you just go get a job with WotC and be honest with your listeners? Just from going forward, just do pros and cons. Don't try to sell us magic cards. And I opened up his image, and it's this young individual flicking two birds in the air, and I'm like, oh my God, context matters. This person, if this is the worst part of their day that I talked about a magic card and they didn't like the representation of that said magic card, I'm thinking this has been the worst work week I've had in forever. And out of this joy that I lifted this is I was fine. I'm like, oh man, this person's got me a really bad review. And then I clicked on this image, and it's just like these two little thumbs and this two little middle fingers thrown up in the air. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is what I needed to close this Friday out. It's such a weird, and May's like, don't be reading those. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to read those. May.
You're braver than I.
Don't say I didn't warn you.
Yeah.
May warned me. But May, we talked about this, and Emma Partlow actually wrote the fantastic article that I think anybody that does content creation should read about mental health in regards to content creation, because you guys have said it a lot. Like, putting yourself out there to the universe sometimes speaks back, right? And maybe you don't want to hear what the universe has to say. That is a real possibility of making these decisions, right? But I'm 46 years of age, soon to be 47. My skin is fairly thick at this point. And I guess that would be one of the challenges that I would throw out there, that if anybody wants to go out and start their own podcast or YouTube channel or do any kind of form of content creation, May's advice is solid. Don't necessarily read all of the reviews, because that could take a toll on you if you allow it to. Would you agree with that, May?
Absolutely. I think that it's hard for me to explain sometimes that before the podcast, I used to do YouTube content. I used to do miscellaneous video games and commentaries and whatnot. Sometimes I just sit down and just talk about something I wanted to talk about while playing some game. And I used to do that for, 2 years? And even though I met a lot of people that I care a lot about because of it, I've also had a lot of people that, how do I put it? Let's say are not the kindest people. And the problem is that when you're putting yourself out there is that you get the opportunity for the public court. And the problem is that when you're in the people's court is sometimes you're going to have tomatoes thrown at you. And one thing that I've always been particularly grateful for with this podcast is that it really feels like that I have a place that people want to hear me and hear me talk about things without it being, it doesn't feel like I'm having to completely put on some show or perform in such a way that I'm not going to get harassed, because I used to get a lot of hate comments about how I sound and whatnot, and it's why I'm always self-conscious about it. And this is a space that I felt good to, and it's restored my confidence in a lot of ways.
Good. That's all we want.
Which you should have.
Yeah. This is a safe space. And that's the whole idea too, is that we're friends just talking about something that we find so much passion with, right? From different aspects of the game. It's not even, sometimes it's a lot more than just a game, right? I know that it's a game, it's a release, it's supposed to be a hobby, but sometimes it's an outlet, right? And I said I have a lot of energy, and I like to paint, and I like to draw, and I like to write, right? But it was unfocused, and I needed a magnifying glass to bring it in. And I can see where you have thoughts, you have somewhere you want to place those thoughts, right? Like writing a letter or whatever. Well, this podcast serves that idea too. And you have a voice, and we recognize the voice out the gate. The first time you came on the episode was a moment where I'm like, wow, like you got to imagine where someone's producing a record and they've got the first person in the sound studio that's playing that record and they go, oh my gosh, this is a hit. Right. And I talked to Stu after you hung up the phone with us, aka the internet with us. And I was like, this is a hit. Like, she's got everything that we need. We're lacking. Yeah. That's what I mean by that.
Get her in there.
Yeah, get her in there. It wasn't even like Stu and I didn't even deliberate about it.
Sign the transfer fee.
We didn't argue. There was no lamenting about it. No. It just straight up well, yep, I'm just gonna ask her. I'm gonna be so bold and see what she has to say. And thank God you said yes, because we'd be hobbling along again with me describing. You know that green creature that cost 3? What is that? Leatherback Beowulf? Leatherback Beowulf?
I mean, that is one that does cost 3. That is correct.
I think that's it. There's only so much leatherback Beowulf you can put in an episode, May. So we are.
That is not true. Yeah. We could do a whole episode on Colonian Hydras and Strangleroot Geists and Experiment Ones and all of the above. One day it will happen.
But I'm glad that y'all are feeling good about bringing me on and, locking me in the basement with the microphone and forcing me to record every week.
Yeah, May, your family. And some of the things the listeners might not know, but during UberCubeathon, this is more just side note stuff. We're just being indulgent here at UberCube. This is our episode. One of the most special moments that I can talk about is my son bonded with you amazingly. And I'm going to share this. I was playing records. We all shot pool. My son, Caden, May, and I shot pool upstairs. We listened to some records. We had a good time. And I was really tired, right? It's been a long day. I know I got to get up early and do the UberCubeathon. But May and my kid just sat there and played with Hot Wheels. I mean, how many hours did you guys play with Hot Wheels? I mean, it was amazing.
I think it was like an hour and a half or so. We even set up a little track and then like shot little cars into the carbon, and it was pretty fun.
Oh my God. My son instantly fell in love. He's like, when is May coming back? I'm like, as soon as possible. My family was adored.
So what you're saying is we don't need any more excuses. We just got to keep these UberCubeathons going.
We got to keep them going.
I got a clubhouse. It's $100 to rent. Let's go. I'll throw $100 to rent that bad boy out once a month or whatever, let's do it.
We'll kind of close that one off. May, you are family. It's more than just friendship at this point. You've become part of I want to call it UberCube for a tagline, but at the end of the day, you're part of our family, right? So this is always a safe space, and we just adore you.
We do love found family arcs.
Absolutely. So let's do some listener-provided questions. I got some people that asked some questions about the show, and I'm going to present this from our good friend Stephen Conenfall, a.k.a. James Hetfield from Metallica.
That's right.
So, question for UberCube, the 100th episode extravaganza Boogaloo. What does fun mean to each of you when drafting? Let's start out with May. What does fun mean to you while drafting?
Fun means to me when either I can build the silly stompy deck, or I can live the dream by making some weird engine work. Like, it is a good draft day when I can make a weird deck and it does the thing. I don't need to win with the thing, I just like to do the thing. And anytime that I can play a cube that gives me those opportunities, I feel good. And that's what I find fun.
You and I are kindred in that sense, because I lean into the Johnny aspect of building. That's why I have the Uber Bears Artifact Cube. By the way, this is my little plug that's going up for voting for CubeCon. And by the time this episode comes out, it will still be an active vote. So please vote. But it speaks miles on how my brain works. I like complex interactions. I like to watch, I even like to watch players do things that are outside of the norm. I like to watch stuff like modular and moving encounters and weird interactions. Aggro is probably my least favorite package, because whenever I get Boros aggro passed to me, because I read a draft, my most unhappy day that I have, I'm like, whatever, I turn creature sideways. That doesn't inspire me or bring me joy. I want to do something complicated like KCI in our good friend Chill MTG's Dragons of Winter Night that recently got selected for CubeCon.
Yep,
that
congrats,
made me so happy. Oh my gosh. But I like those type of moments. How about you, Stu?
So I will say that it depends on the mood. I agree 100% that I am let's open the first pack. Let's see if there's just something in there, some kind of engine, some kind of signpost for something that's going to allow me to have fun, right? It could be sacking stuff. It could be counters. It could be card type, anything. I'm looking for just some kind of signpost, and now I want to build towards that and agree 100%. I just want to figure out some kind of cool interaction combination of things that I can try and make work. I don't care if I win. I just want to make that work. But I am starting to really realize the power of just taking creatures that slap. And if you'd have asked me this question probably a few months ago, I would have said, no, I don't like turning creatures sideways, and no, I'm just looking for the fun. But I don't know if it's maybe a more recent thing, and maybe this is kind of sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But the last few drafts we've had, I've drafted some pretty good aggro decks, and my record right now, Chris, we played last night, Samich, I love you, you son of a bitch. He broke my winning streak that stretched across 3 days between the Fem, the Vintage, and his Peasant Cube. But I just drafted an aggro deck, and it was a mono white or white splash aggro deck, and it was awesome. I mean, poor Christian, good friend Christian of the channel, he kind of got his butt rear end handed to him, but it was not just, I'm going to turn creature sideways. I'm looking for interaction. I'm looking for reaction from the person that I'm playing against. I'm looking for things that I can do within that archetype. And that's not just within aggro. It could be stretching out to a combo or a control or whatever the case may be. So now I'm looking at, I'm not always just looking at where is the fun. I'm looking at where is the fun within an archetype, and I'll just put myself in a mood to play that for that day. And that's become fun for me.
And okay, so we got another roll up into another question. This is from my good friend ChillMTG, the author or the curator of Dragons of Winter Night. So Chill asks, aka Jonathan, what has been your favorite libation you've enjoyed over the course of 100 episodes? And I'm going to go ahead and answer my own question with an answer here immediately. It was the idea of it. It was whenever Dan Loop reached out to me. And Dan Loop is an amazing human being, and he's one of the CubeCon associates as well, too. Communications, if I'm not mistaken. And he reached out to me and said he wanted to do a six-pack swap. And there's a little bit of funny story here. So we went to CubeCon 2023, and I had the best intentions. I tried to find North Carolina's finest, and Dan went and found Wisconsin's finest, and we had this intention of meeting up at the Delta Bar, where we were all going to do this bar cube night one night, and I was excited about this libation. And unfortunately, all of my friends had consumed all of the intended beers that I was going to hand off to Dan. Sorry, Dan, in advance. So then I had to make up, like, here's North Carolina's finest. He handed me off these beers he'd been curating for me in this wonderful six-pack. And it was one of the most exciting things as far as the drinks I've consumed, because I've got someone from another state giving me beers that I traditionally can't have. And they were all kinds of different types, like sours and whatnot. It was fun. It was a really fun idea. But I remember handing them off, like, here's some local
like Sierra Nevada or something.
These are macro brew beers.
Believe it or not, Budweiser and Miller Lights are made right around the corner.
Yeah, Michelob
Hopefully you've never tried these before.
How about you, May? You got a drink of choice? Costco's finest, perhaps?
So I really liked my whiskey sours, but I've also been really liking just having the occasional seltzers.
Can I tell?
Who am I kidding? I like just being able to be the wine snob and make the jokes about it.
Can I tell you? There's a drink that I will forever associate with you because it was a bit of a favorite of yours. I kind of remember in the earlier days, and it's the Moscow Mule.
I do like me some Moscow Mules. Those are pretty tasty.
I'll never forget.
It's something about that copper little cup that just makes it so, right?
It's so fun. There's
like
the fun in my cube.
It's
Like
just
the Moscow
fun.
Mule.
It's just fun. It's like this cup is really cold because it's transferring heat, and I'm an engineer, and I'm a guy with the thermodynamics. But otherwise, yeah, Moscow Mule is fantastic. The next question we had, because Chill has a lot of good questions, is how has your relationship with magic changed between episode 1 and episode 100? I'm going to take this one again. I'm stealing it. I'm asking my own question. Going to answer it immediately because I think it's neat. The contextualization idea has really gripped me harder than I thought. When I first opened up these episodes, we talked about archetypes because we're trying to find things to talk about, right? Like, that's the struggle. We didn't really have a format. We didn't have an idea. What are we going to talk about? So we talked about aristocrats. We talked about the Swords of Fallen Favor, which is episode number 1, which the editing is very poor, but it is what it is. But I was talking about kind of the generic ideas in magic because I just wanted to get some conversational flow. What I would say that has changed in this conversation is like our good friend Bill that we had on recently, where he talked about a Knights deck that had soul rings in it. If you had asked me 5 years ago, should soul ring be in a cube, I would say, get this out of here. It's like one of the power, I'd say power 9 plus 10, right? I would automatically dismiss it. But then the contextualization of an idea like soul ring, where I've learned like in a 1-drop cube, it doesn't matter as much if you're not supporting like colorless stuff. Or maybe it doesn't matter as much whenever you're doing double mono white pips, etc. Really takes that card and ratchets it down. So that's the first thing I scroll to whenever I look at a new list. So like, hey, UberBear, what do you think about my cube list? I always scroll down to the color section. I'm like, oh, there's a Soul Ring, there's a Jete, there's a Mana Crypt. Maybe these things are too powerful. That's what everybody does. I think that's what everybody does. It's kind of like intrinsically built into us, right? But what I've learned from doing this podcast over time is that contextualization of cards do matter, and that you can't get into the curator's mind all the time, and you have to understand the context of the environment from that 40,000 foot view. May, what have you learned since you started doing this episodes with us? This crazy talks that we have mostly Friday nights.
Well, learning to get past my imposter syndrome has been interesting.
That's a fair statement.
Sometimes I'm still confused about how I ended up here and why people are interested in the things that I'm saying. But I think that the thing that I've started to learn the most is how to actually like open up a bit more and I guess be okay with the things that we're doing.
How about yourself, Stu?
I've realized that I don't really have any interest in playing any other format other than Cube anymore.
Why is that?
Same.
Because this is something that we've spoke about previously. When we first got together, right? When you and I first met, and I met the play group that we have right now, we used to get together to play Magic, but we didn't get together to play Magic. We only got together to play Commander, right? Very occasionally there would be a foray into something else. Maybe we'd do a pre-release. Maybe there'd be a box floating around, which is what we did last night, and I'll talk about that in a few. But it was always to play Commander. Always. There was never any question of whether or not we were going to get together and do something else. But I do remember all those years ago, occasionally Anthony would say, you know what, we got a bunch of people. You guys want a cube? And I remember the reaction being like, no, we just want to play Commander, you know. And I was like, I don't really know a whole lot about your cube. I know that there's a vintage cube. I'm familiar-ish with it, but yeah, whatever. It was always Commander. And my enjoyment of playing Commander diminished very, very quickly over the years. And it wasn't, I want to say years like it was 15 years or something. It was a couple of years of playing. And I started to just enjoy it less and less and less and less. And that's still the case to this day. And I couldn't even tell you the last time I played a game of Commander. My decks just kind of sit in the bag and collect dust. I always associated the Commander format as the social format, right? I always looked at it as, right, you've got these 60 card decks that are competitive, and then you've got this 100 card format that is casual. And I'm really I'm in my 40s now. I just kind of want a casual social experience. Cube has taken over that, not just because I don't need to be competitive or not because I need to be competitive. It's just become a much, much better way for me to enjoy my time when I'm playing Magic. I would say that I let the game affect me occasionally a little bit more than it should.
Like that time you threw my America wall.
I did do that. I threw a card of Anthony's, and I'm like, the next day you're thinking, why did you act like such a toolbox over a game of Magic, right? Great opportunity of self-reflection. That we haven't even really talked about that, but yeah, Anthony and I got into a discussion, and it was just me basically completely overreacting about Anthony saying he was playing a deck and it was not very powerful or whatever. It had some powerful cards in it though.
Yeah, I may have been a little bit manipulative in this conversation too, right? Like, so when I play Cube, I like to play like control decks, and I've talked about before, I like doing stacks, and I like doing these type of aspects of Magic. And in Cube, it's almost like, or Christian says it best. Whenever I'm playing Cube, I'll play kind of hard-nosed. I will play competitively, but when I'm playing Commander, I go super loosey-goosey, and I don't care what the outcome is. When we're playing Cube, we can kind of be more focused. That is the fundamental problem right there.
Yeah, that's the fundamental problem right there, is why I don't really favor Commander anymore, is because the loosey-goosiness of it and the rule zeroing of it typically just leads to games that are not fun.
Well, and I'm going to go a little further. It's because we're passionate people. I'm not here to poo-poo on Commander. We're not going to do that. Well, like, I like Commander. Sometimes I'll be the boogeyman. When we have time, time that we can't spare, we're like, let's bust out some Commander decks. But like, it's really choice. We kind of know what we're doing. And there's a meta that's already formed, and there's no preordained notion. Cube kind of wipes all that away. That aspect is gone, where everybody's kind of there is no rule zero because everything's rule zero. And most curators are pretty cool and say, I'm not just going to go spike my own cube. Like, it's kind of an unspoken thing that just kind of occurs. Like,
I think you can say that if it's your own cube, then yeah, okay. I would expect you, if I'm drafting your cube for the first time and I don't really know anything about it, then okay, that would be nice for you to not just know that here's the broken synergy stuff and I'm going to draft a deck that, or take the cards that I know are going to be broken that might not seem so obvious. I think that at least between our group right now, you probably don't need to wait too long before you can say, okay, a couple of drafts in, you guys are pretty aware of what's going on with this cube and we can just go bananas with it, right? You as the curator, okay, sure, knock yourself out. Draft whatever you think is the most powerful. But that's another thing that's a learning experience for you. Like, you've even said, man, you got this cube and I watched someone draft it and they did something that I didn't even see when I was designing it. So I think that's a great opportunity for a learning experience for the curator. And I wouldn't feel bad for you. Like I say, if you, after a couple of times you want to go nuts and spike it, knock yourself out.
So we're being a little indulgent, we said, and tangential, but May, on that topic of, we kind of talked about the Commander Infusion idea, because you're a Commander player that kind of adopted Cube and it makes you happy. What is it about Cube that brings you joy? Or again, I want to put this stamp on here. This is not to offend or to push down the idea of Commander. We do play Commander, and it's a fun experience when it can be.
Anthony's saying this.
Well, I'm being truthful. Like, there's a time and place for that. Like, sometimes we just want to bust it out. But, May, you play with your friend circle all the time, and you experience this often.
Most of the Magic I get to play is Commander. But whenever I get to play Cube, even when I'm not the one, like, actively participating in the draft, I still have more fun. Because for me, Cube is a way that I can continuously, like, work on crafting this environment and this sort of piece that I'm working on to translate a message, an idea, a gameplay, this type of thing that I'm trying to encapsulate and encourage people to have. And I can't get that with Commander. Like, for example, I recently built a Wasitoro deck. She's the dragon cat thing that makes dragon cats. She's not a good commander by any stretch. I can't really play her with my playgroup because my playgroup is very spiky. But however, I'm not going to take apart this deck, and I'm happy that I built it because it's just like, hey, what if I just made a dragon deck that's kind of aggro-y, but with like a bunch of dragon moms, and I just make baby dragons, and that's the shtick of the deck.
What's the power level?
Exactly. And in Cube, it doesn't even have to be like a Rule Zero conversation that comes up, as Stu alluded to. I don't have to worry about bringing a Wasitoro deck into, say, one of the two partner decks where it's Simic partner one and whatever, Rograk or whatever. But when you're sitting down to play a game of Commander, there's so much more that people have to explain, and it always feels like that we're walking away not really grasping what the other people are wanting, versus when you bring in a cube, you can set the expectation of what the environment is about. There's a set number of cards, and being able to play around and build decks in that environment is fun. And I like environments that I can keep rebuilding decks in. Because I like deck building. Deck building's my favorite part. And I just can't really get that itch from EDH.
It's a level playing field, right? Cube is. I always feel that. Yeah, you could argue that it's a great equalizer. You could argue. And we have a friend. We have probably more than one friend who has basically said that they've kind of learned a lot about themselves as players because of the fact that they don't feel as comfortable, or they don't feel like their record really reflects how strong they are as a Magic player when they draft some of the cubes, right? And maybe that's a mindset thing that they're sort of angling more towards wanting to play Commander.
Yeah, I agree. I put a cube out there, and I knew it was going to get just obliterated. Like, it was on virtually day 1, day 2 of the recent CubeCon voting. And it was the Dumpster Fire Cube, the Dumpster Fire Project.
It's a great cube.
And it is, but it isn't. But the idea of it, it's horrible. And I acknowledge this. Like, I kind of put it out there. Like, I have a picture of a dumpster on fire. And it got like 8th place. And that's exactly where it deserved to be in the voting polls. And all I really wanted about, and this is CubeCon, I'm letting you know this now. The only reason why I wanted to put it out there is so that people could see this idea, this fundamental, that you could get your play group together, grab your cards, and build a cube. That was ultimately what I wanted out of this. It was just the exposure, not, for the love of God, Chris and I talked about it, Sandwich, that would please, I hope this doesn't actually go to CubeCon. And I was just so happy that it actually just bottomed out. It was fantastic. All I really want people to do is click on it, read it, and go, hey, that's a cool idea. That's all we really wanted out of that idea, is to kind of spread this word that you could just get your friends together, commune 8, 10, 12 people, right? Make your own pod, make your own friend circle, bring them together. And they have Magic cards, and they could donate 45-ish, right? And they could put them together, and then you could have one person kind of act as a, air quotes, as Stu talked about, the bandhammer moderator, right? As Anthony likes to do. But like a person that could officiate the idea and bring it together and basically mold and curate an idea of a cube that's like a budget under $100. Very representative of the idea of the fake cube, right? It's a budget-friendly idea. It's very introductory but complex in the same sentence, right? The fake cube gives you what you want out of it. That's one of the coolest designs I've ever seen. Like, whatever you want to sit down, that's the rule 0 of that idea. You want to play complex? Play fairies. Get hosed. Do mill. It's so much.
It is definitely the reason that I feel like that the fake cube gets a lot of the cloning and attention that it does is
The
because
love.
it is. It's an environment that I have carefully crafted to both be beginner friendly, while also just having very, very low complexity in terms of what they're trying to do. The only complex mechanic is adventures, but I also wanted it so that way people can feel like that there's room to show skillful drafting and deck building and play. And in a lot of ways, it's my magnum opus because of that. But on the other hand, I work on other cubes sometimes.
Do you?
Like, can be known for things other than the fake cube, but it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. You're like that person that, like, you're kind of like that famous band that's like, sing that song, sing that song. You're like, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Like Nirvana hated playing Smells Like Teen Spirit because it's like, we do have other songs, right?
Yeah. Same thing with Black Hole Sun. They actually actively hated that song whenever that was Soundgarden. Like,
Yeah.
they actively hated that song.
They shouldn't.
It's
an amazing
it's their magnus
song.
opus. They didn't want to be their opus. That's fantastic.
It's not even my favorite song on that album as well. So Chris Cornell, I know you're passed away, but if you're listening up there, Mailman is better.
It is. All right. So from another listener, we have our good friend Sam McKenna that asked the question, 100th episode questions, because I put it out there to our UberCube Discord. If you want to get in this action, just join that Discord.
That's right.
Right? So what is it going to take to make the Doom Cube become a reality? I'm going to follow up.
Stu.
Time.
I'm going to ask the rude questions.
Time.
I'm going to be the bad cop now.
Time.
What is your hang up? You want perfection?
Time. It's just time. It's just time to work on it. I'm busy, right? I have a job and I have a wife and I have 3 children and I have very few evenings to none to really spend any kind of significant amount of time to be able to work on a cube right now. That really is the reality. There isn't some psychological barrier. I'm definitely not looking for perfection. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I would be happy at this point. We know it's going to be a 180, or I know it's going to be a 180 to start. I would be happy to just throw the 180 together, get the cards, and just say, let's just do a draft. Let's just get 4 people together and do a draft and just kind of see what happens. Or throw the list out to my resident experts here on the podcast and Chris and whoever else and say, just give it a whirl. Check it out. See what you think. But that's all it is. It's time.
So one of my questions I have to follow up with that is, what is the framework? What is the vision you have for the cube? Kind of tell the listeners, pretend like there's a first time listener, because there very well may be, right?
So let's pretend that I've made the cube and someone's like, right, what's this cube about?
What are you trying to do?
What I'm trying to do with this cube is I'm trying to capture the essence of the emotion that I felt way back all those years ago when computer video gaming was not at the level that it is today. We didn't have World of Warcraft or Crysis or, any Age of Empires 2. I mean, I could reel off a list of all the legendary games from over the years. But it all, certainly this genre started all those years ago. Maybe not totally started, but at least is represented by the origins of Doom. Doom is one of the most iconic video games of all time. There's an emotion that I felt when I first played it. It's a horror game. It's a shooter. There's all these different monsters. The level design for Doom and Quake is something that I think anyone who's familiar with them will really understand just how unbelievably complex the level design is with those old video games from id Software. Quake in particular, the level design is just absolutely off the charts. And it was an emotional response that I felt from that very few video games ever before or since have really been able to capture. And I wanted that with the art, with just a fun sort of gory, if you will, experience of playing a cube. And that's what I want to capture with the Doom Cube.
So I have a question for you. What are you going to do for the BFG? Do you have any ideas for that? For anybody that looks up the
I
acronym?
thought about putting the BFG in the cube. Right? The BFG. There's a card called the BFG, right? So for anyone who's not aware, this is a very old card. And it's called BFG. It's actually 2 cards that you have to have on the battlefield. And if one leaves, the other leaves. And it's like you know this card?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like 1 billion black mana to cast it. And it's huge. I might just put in that in there.
What are you going to do for shotgun and chainsaw in this conversation?
I don't know. I haven't looked at the list for a long time. I think I have like equipment in there to represent that, because obviously, anyway, like it's Doom, so you've got Doom Guy and you've got different guns and different monsters, and it needs to be a little bit more expansive than that to be a cube, right? At first, I was like, can I just do this artistically and make it very aggro? But I don't want it to be that simplistic. I want it to be a little bit more of a vibe, a bit more horror-y and a bit more mechanical than that. So I don't know. I really don't know. Like I said, I haven't looked at the list for a while.
This has become the Secret Doom episode. I got more questions because the listeners want to know. Like, how are we going to do the med packs? Food?
Don't know.
Food?
No, not doing food.
Not doom food?
Not doing food. No
There's
food.
so many questions. May probably has them too. Like, how do you do doom food?
No, not doing food.
So, I have just kind of an overarching question. Do you have any learning experience that you've picked up, May? Anything you've learned? It's kind of translated even to your personal life from doing this idea. Anything that's ultimately made you a better human, right? In some I guess, pretext, I guess. The idea of like you take these ideas and you translate them into not just a talk on the podcast, but maybe take them into your personal environments. Anything you got out of this?
That it's okay to not always be 100% all the time in regards to content creation. And I think that that's an important thing that a lot of people don't really grasp when it comes to this, is that understanding that it is okay to not give some things your 100% all the time. And that's an okay thing, and it makes you human.
I'm going to lean into that one a little bit and say that what I've picked up from it is it's increased from a business standpoint, as far as my work interactions, it's made my conversations more eloquent, more succinct, more direct, where I can kind of get to the point. I can dig in because I suffer from a lot of the things that a lot of people do. I'm undiagnosed ADHD. I know this because it runs in my family pretty wholeheartedly, and it helps me to give focus when I'm talking to people. So when I'm doing a presentation or I'm trying to drive to a point, I used to try to teach something. I teach a lot of technical classes, and I would find that they would be a little rambly, a little bit like I'd go off into tangential space and then try to come back. Now I figured out how to make the tangents, I guess, more worthwhile of the listener's time, I guess what I'm saying, so they can get something out of it and then bring it back in. It helps.
Can you focus on anything for like 10 minutes? I can't. I can't sit there. I have friends that I work with, and they can be like, I need to shut off all distractions, and I've got this, and I'm just going to plow away on it for 4 hours without any. And I'm like, how on earth do you do that?
I'd explode.
I would melt. I would literally just melt. There's no way I can do that. I don't have the mental capacity or the wiring, if you will, to just shut everything out and just focus like that on one thing. I've never been able to do that. Maybe read a book if I get really enthralled by it, but I don't feel like that's the same thing. But I can't do that either.
For me, it's music. I play like a lot of Typo and Negative. I'll play some Pantera or whatever, on top of the fact that the listeners may not know this, but
Good choices.
I do. I'm diagnosed with tinnitus, which is really hard to actually podcast with, right? We talked about this before we started. I keep telling Stu to turn the volume up. And while we're doing that, sometimes I have to kind of go through the bees in my head and try to find the point, I guess, the waypoints of conversation. So again, I want to bring it back. That's why I'm grateful for having the trifecta, the Triforce, because May can tell when I'm struggling. Stu can tell when I'm struggling, when I'm kind of like, I can't get this thought out, right? And you guys kind of pick it up and like, I think this is what you mean. May goes, I think this is what you mean, right? Like, Uvenwall Oddity is the best card ever printed. You guys kind of complete my sentences. I love it.
Of all the cards you could have picked, you chose that one?
I did. I chose violence.
Gosh.
It was an attack.
We're not talking
But
about
no,
that
I
anymore.
get the same way even when I'm on the podcast, where there are just times where I am not able to formulate the sentences in the way that I want. And there are times when we're just able to let each other pick up the ball in a way that's pretty nice. So
funniest moments of the podcast. This is one of the questions that kind of came up, is what are some of the funniest or most unexpected moments of the podcast? And I'm just going to go ahead and answer this one. I'm going to put a little interlude in here. It's when we bust out with a little bit of Labyrinth. And I think Anthony
Yeah, I was
Maddox
thinking the
will
same
appreciate this truly. And we start singing a little bit of You Remind Me of the Babe. Which, let's go and do it.
What babe?
Babe of the Power.
What power?
Power of Voodoo.
You do?
Hoodoo.
Do what?
Remind me of the babe. I saw my baby as hard as babe could cry. What could I do? My baby love is gone. Where's my baby blue? Nobody knew what kind of magic spells to use. Frogman. I screwed that part up. Puppy dog tails, thunder and lightning, and baby says, "Ha!"
So, are the Painlands and Filterlands due for a cube resurgence with the Modern Horizons 3 Eldrazi's right around the corner, May?
That is from Sam, and I'm gonna go.
You didn't even need to finish the sentence. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with no, because I already kind of felt. So I felt like personally that the Painlands were trappy with the first ones. Was it Reality, whatever it was, the Reality Smasher, I think it was, and I try to include this idea of the waste and all this stuff in my powered vintage cube at the time, unless you're harvesting and curating this entire environment based on this idea. Like the Devoid cube's probably going nuts for this.
Right.
But like trying to make this exception for the idea of the Painlands, I like them in my artifact cube for what they do. I think they're perfectly serviceable and fine, but I really don't want to expend the energy to try to make an archetype have these surplus of lands that it has to have to work.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're going to have to kind of force the issue.
It's forced.
With these in order to make them work. And I will say that I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that get super excited about the big old Eldrazi and about the color spells. Absolutely more power to you. They're not really my bag, usually. I don't really care either way.
I think they're neat, but yeah.
They're cool. They're cool cards, right? I mean, look, Emrakul is an incredible card. I channeled it out twice in one evening just a couple of weeks ago, much to the chagrin of two of my friends that I was playing with, who were like, "Really? You're going to do that twice in one night? You're going to channel Emrakul and just end the game right then and there?" Like, yes, absolutely I am. But as far as like the broad scope of all the Eldrazi's and the requirements for colorless mana and all that kind of stuff, it's cool. I think it's kind of build aroundy. I think, like I say, I think you kind of need to shoehorn them in. Do I think it's going to be this huge impact like asteroid to cube that all these Eldrazi's are coming in? No, I don't.
But I was too busy listening to the whispers of Mommy Emrakul. So.
Another question we had presented was unreleased content, right? Are there any interesting stories or segments that didn't make the air that you can share now? So
not that we should share. Now.
I'm going to do it anyway.
You shouldn't, because a lot of those conversations were not safe for our podcast.
Well, we're gonna just take it down a little bit. We're going to be a little reductive with some of the conversation.
All right, fine.
So one of them we had was our Dragons episode, and this is before May came on board, where we had a person come on, it's a good friend of ours, that I don't think that Stu and I behaved in a way, this is being honest, that was in good taste, right? Like we chose to kind of, I don't know. It was maybe we had bad work weeks or whatever, but when the guest came on, it's a friend of ours, and we were having a conversation about dragons and about which ones you should put in your cube. I ended up cutting this episode because I decided it did not fit the vibe of what we're attempting to do. Me particular, I was acting in such a way that I don't think was positive, right? I don't want to always be positive. Sometimes we want to choose violence because we do that, right? But there's also a point where maybe I overstepped. And I think that's a human aspect, and kind of what May talked about. Sometimes you have to step back and ask yourself, was this what you really want out of the show? So mistakes were made.
Is this making me a better warrior, or is this depleting my defenses?
Yeah, so we were kind of, Stu and I sat and talked about it, and we're like, I don't think we treated this person very well. We decided to delete that episode.
We did.
And we redid it with our good friend David, the regional dragonologist. Mm-hmm. But the time, it was just like maybe some of the conversation was a little abrupt and a little crass, and we decided that wasn't good taste and that wasn't the vibe. And it's funny because when you have an audience, the translation doesn't always come across that way, right? When you have a friend, you can kind of go and jest, and maybe it's not, I don't want to call it locker room talk or having fun or poking fun or whatever you want to do, right? Friends kind of poke at each other, but you got to think about how it would be perceived to a mass audience. And I don't think this particular episode we did it didn't pass my quality assurance. When I listened to it, I'm like, I don't like what I did here. This is not me as a person. This doesn't represent what I'm trying to do. So we cut that episode. So that's our first lost episode. I'll never release it. It was just a mistake. The second time we did it, May, you and I and Stu took on the Fem Cube. and we decided that we didn't represent it in such a way. Would you agree with that? It didn't really
I agree.
Yeah, it didn't meet what we wanted.
I'm much happier with the episode that we went back to for it, but I do think that it was a good stepping stone to give us a chance to back up and reevaluate how we wanted to address that episode. So I don't think it was time wasted in that regard. I
don't either. I think recently even May and I tried to take over an episode and we talked about My Beloved Gut, which was important to us, and we tried to do this in my office, and we decided this was we're not going to call this a lost episode. We just started recording, and then I turned it off and said this isn't the whole story to tell. There's a lot more to unpack here, right? Like what we wanted to do, and we wanted more dynamics. Would you agree with that statement?
I would also say that the interruptions of the man down the street with the chainsaw going...
There was a chainsaw. Which you need to do, Cube, by the way.
His power tool orchestra across the street for you.
There was a lot of grass cutting. Another thing that we cut, too, oftentimes out of the episode, you guys, we have babies. And we cut... You don't get to hear this as listeners, but we have a lot... What do we call them? Borks? Bork? The dog? Yeah, it's always bork. It's always fun. We've had multiple episodes beforehand, before even May came on the show. We'd have the window open and you could hear a dog barking outside, and we're like, whatever, or sirens. So we've had a guest on that was in an urban situation where there's sirens going off or whatever, and we're like, what do we do with this? I don't know. But they'll talk through it, but you can't tell them to pause. But it's been fun. It's something we've learned as we've done it. Unreleased content. Guest wish list. This is a fun one. So I'm going to give a big secret now, and everybody can laugh at me secretly, and you can all just like giggle and chuckle and all that. When I designed this podcast, I'm a person that puts like, what is my S tier? Who's the person I want to have on the show? And if you're listening, which I doubt very much, but I will tell you that you liked like 4 of my reach outs to you or whatever. Don't giggle at me. It's Post Malone. I would love to have Post Malone on our show. When I started this with Stu, I said, I'm going to have Post Malone on the show.
You did.
That's my end game.
And do you remember what I said at the time? I said, you've got one chance to get Post Malone on the show, right? Outside of, I don't know, winning the Powerball and offering him like $50 million. But your best chance of getting Post Malone on the podcast, back when this was a thing, was to open the One Ring, sell it to him, and as part of the cost of selling him the One Ring, say, I'll sell it you for $2 million or whatever it went for, and you have to be on the podcast.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that ship has sailed.
I don't think so.
It has, because the card was opened.
Well, so we've already had Pleasant Kenobi, we've had Emma Partlow, and we've had Justin Parnell. A lot of these people I really look up to, and I wanted to have them on the show, right?
Sure.
That was the goal. I actually would like to have the professor very much on the show. I'm putting it out there full reach. Like, comes Cube.
I think the professor would be incredible.
I'm going to ask.
You should.
But I also, at the same time, when we go to the guest wish list, this is going to sound a little weird, but I also like having just us curators, just people every day.
I love the episodes with just us.
I like everyday people on the show too. I'm not that reachy. Yeah. I'm not shooting for the stars at the same time. May, who's your guest wish list? Who would you like to have on the show?
See, that's a hard question.
It is.
There's a lot of people that I'd enjoy having on the show just to talk about Cube. Maybe this is like, if we're going to go completely pipe dream.
Yeah,
here,
go ahead.
Gavin?
Yeah, why not? Gavin, if you're listening, I'd like to have Ryan Sachs. I've got people that I want to have on the show, too. I've got a whole list. I've got a whole lineup of people I want to reach out. Reed Duke. I mean, but at the same time, I also want to keep the show humble and fun and light, right? Yeah. And I want all these people are fantastic. Ryan Overturf. These are all wonderful people.
Yeah,
it's great. But I also want to stay grounded at the same time. Is that fair? I enjoy. It makes me happy to have Stephen Conifal on the show.
Yes,
like the most wonderful human you ever met in your life.
Listen, I agree 100%. I've loved all of the people that we've had on the show. We've been very, I don't want to say specific, but we've chosen to have people on the show because we believe that they will add to the vibe, to the content, that they're great people, that and they've just always had so much to offer, right? So I'm going to take over the question. Very low-hanging fruit, but I would also love to have Luis on the show.
Yeah.
Luis is probably the most widely known content creator for Cube right now, right? He's been doing vintage Cube content forever. I would have maybe argued Caleb Gannon a few years ago, but I don't really see Caleb Gannon making much content anymore, which is really a shame because I was such a junkie for his content. I loved watching Caleb Gannon, but I loved LSV. And in the same kind of sphere, definitely a lesser known Benny Hill.
Yeah.
And there's a pattern here, right? They're all vintage Cube content creators. Benny Hill is a huge favorite of mine, and our very own J-Bro. J-Bro was wonderful on the show. Loved having him on. So if there was like a Cube person, I love LSV. I love watching his content. I love watching Benny Hill's content. He's a very, very, very good player. Always right there at the top of the leaderboard, right? But Post Malone is not a Cube person. So
No.
So I want to stretch out and like.
You could ask me the question.
So
Go
this
ahead.
is. So I'm gonna say this is not. There's two people. They're both Magic people, right? The first one, it's got to be Garfield.
Yeah.
Dr. Garfield himself.
Yeah.
If there was any way that Dr. Garfield would come on the show, I would love to have him on and just talk about Cube, right? I'm going to hazard a guess that all the way back in the 90s when he was designing Magic and Magic was first being released, probably didn't have Cube as a format in mind when all this was being released. So I would love to get his input on like the vintage Cube and just Cube as a format in general. And I would also, I don't know if you guys might be familiar, Brian Weissman. You familiar with Brian Weissman? Brian Weissman is the originator and designer of the deck. This is a deck that has gone through a gazillion iterations since the early 90s, but he's, I don't want to say the father or the godfather of Control, but I would probably recommend anyone who's interested in the history of Magic and archetypes and certainly Control to look at the original The Deck. The deck was a 60-card format deck back when Type 1, and, you know, there wasn't Modern or any of the newer formats. And Brian Weissman developed this deck called The Deck. And it was a control deck that used things like J.M. Day Tome and Swords to Plowshares and stuff like that. And he developed a deck that was, I'm going to control the game, and then I'm going to win with angels, right? A particular, you might know it. It's a white angel. May, what's it called
Sarah
again?
Angel?
Yes, that's the one.
Ah.
Sarah Angel.
Sarah.
But
No, I
someone
don't think
who
that's
is
right.
Shivan Dragon.
Shivan Dragon. But someone
It
who's
was
just
Shivan
had
Dragon,
someone
clearly.
who's just had such like an impact and a story throughout the years and years of Magic, and it's obviously not Cube specific, but I think Brian would be very cool.
I want to go over favorite guest quotes. I have one to add to this one, and it's going to be Derek, our good friend Derek Gallen, who said, "Find the fun." That's the entire idea of building a cube. And it's kind of short, sweet, simple, but really kind of ties off what we're talking about here, right? Find the fun. Where's the fun at in your cube? That's what people ask. May, you've asked that this entire time. Where is the fun? How do people actually find the origin of fun in your environments?
I mean, it's the first question. It's the first thing that you have to do in regards to game design is follow the fun.
So mine is going to be very simple and sweet again. Yeah, agree. I agree with Stu on this one. And that's the quote. And it was by JP, Justin Parnell. God love you. And it kind of, that's might sound a little tongue-in-cheek. Justin Parnell was a really early guest of ours. And he came on at a time where I've never had an ego about this cube. Certainly don't have an ego about my knowledge or understanding of Magic, because it's certainly not on the level of either of you guys or any of our guests or 90% of the people that can spell Magic, for crying out loud. But I had some opinions about stuff. And to have someone like that who kind of validated my own opinions, this is incredibly egocentric maybe for me to even be mentioning that, but I feel like someone coming on and just saying, actually, you're kind of on the money with that opinion that you have. That was the first time that I ever thought, oh, I actually have a bit of an understanding. Cool.
Yeah, validation is real.
Bit of validation.
Right? Yeah, validation.
I don't normally look for it, but it was nice to have
But you got it for free. Like
I got it for
unsolicited
free.
advice.
I
People
got
will
it for
take it,
free,
right?
Exactly. We didn't even have a Patreon back then, and we were still losing money on the podcast.
Still are. So,
never mind.
podcasting advice. So this is an interesting one. Like, so I love my Monday morning, Tuesday morning drive. So right now, my typicals, I'll give my go-tos. I'm going to ask all of you, what do you listen to? Because people want to know, right? So, like, aside from my metal music and my, I guess, Tame Impala that I listen to or whatever, I also listen to a lot of podcasts. So Lucky Paper Radio is one of my go-tos. Like every Monday morning, I'm really excited. I got a long drive. This is what I fire up. Or I listen to, unfortunately, our podcast 40 times before I release it. Or I listen to Squares the Cube. I also enjoy just putting like the Pleasant Kenobi on to listen to like some of the amazing rants that Vince does. I enjoy it. Or The Professor, right? But I play all this audio while I'm on airplanes or I save it, and I enjoy it very much. It's kind of part of my weekly, I guess, release whenever I'm kind of listening to UberCube over and over again. I want to hear somebody else and hear what they have to say, right? May, what do you listen to on your off time? It doesn't have to be podcast related, but what's your joy in listening?
Whew, I listen to a lot of different kinds of music, so I tend to not go to as many podcasts as I used to, since doing it ourselves. And I know that that's probably not a great thing. Like, don't get me wrong, there are times where I just want to sit down and just think about it, like Cube, and just listen to what people have to say. But the rest of the time, I'm just kind of thinking about things that I want to do for our podcast and things that I want to say for our podcast and whatnot. So sometimes that I'll just look at our upcoming script and just kind of bounce questions in my head and being like, oh, well, here's some of the ways that I could improv around this and whatnot, and so I can kind of prepare myself that way. But in terms of what I listen to that's not podcasts, I actually listen to a good amount of, like, jazz, believe it or not. Like, I'm not, how do I put it? Aficionado? No, I'm not well-versed when it comes to a lot of jazz artists, whatever, but there are a lot of times where I'll just slap on some jazz. The rest of the time, it's just going to be indie pop, indie folk. Sometimes I'll put on some lo-fi. So,
Lo-fi regards. I listen to Canon a lot, or Canons, I think it is, the group. I absolutely adore them. And then Tame Impala.
Love me some Tame Impala.
And Our Last Night, which is a great like cover kind of band that takes like a Linkin Park type of vibe to a lot of traditional music. They may take like some Miley Cyrus and then convert it to like a Linkin Park type of vibe. I enjoy that very much. Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, one of my favorite bands recently has been Rainbow Kitten Surprise, because a lot of their songs hit particular notes with me. And it also helps that trans solidarity. So
100%. So in regards to the podcasting advice, because that was one of the things we have on these show notes, because I want to talk about this, show notes, like an organizational pattern. We don't use them. We use them when we talk about show notes. Oftentimes they're just an outline. So anybody that's aspiring to do this, get into this idea of content creation, we use it as a jumping off point. We free flow. We talk about things like whatever comes to our mind. I just use like an idea of a show note card, like, because some cards, Magic cards have like 30,000 printings at this point, probably plus, and it's hard to just pull those up into your mental, I guess, to process those cards so quickly. So I pull up images, but all I do is like Goblin Rabblemaster, and I pull it up so that May can then free flow on the idea of Goblin Rabblemaster, right? To keep cues, but they're not restrictive. So when we say script all the time, it's mostly just an outline so that we can keep waypoints while we're having conversations.
Yeah, talking points.
That's all it really is. Yeah. And I do appreciate like the Squares the Cube episode where they do kind of this just round table discussion of their week and what they experience while cubing. It's very, I guess it's very, farm to table, very just natural, organic, right? They just kind of do whatever top of their minds. But because we all have what we kind of talked about at the beginning of the episode, we need kind of these waypoints so we can kind of keep on topic. And all it does is keep us check time, stuff like that. Anybody that's trying to start a podcast, another piece of advice I do is do it as free as possible, right? We use Audacity for our medium for recording, which we capture through Discord, all free. Our mics, I'm going to give you all this stuff. Mics actually cost about $50 to $70 off of Amazon. Getting a good quality mic does matter.
That will be my absolute number one recommendation.
Yeah.
The content will kind of take care of itself. A good quality level of audio in the recording is absolutely 100% essential. And I would even go as far to say it doesn't even matter if you're doing a podcast, it's all audio. Even if you're doing like YouTube, it still is the number one thing. And I've listened to people. When we first started getting into this, I kind of went into it a little bit, went down the rabbit hole. That is the number one turn off for people. If the audio's not good, if it's crackly, if the levels are terrible, that's what people notice first, and it's what's going to cause people to turn it off very quickly is if the audio is not good.
I will go so far as
Absolutely.
to say...
And you don't need top-end microphones. Like, you can start off with just a snowball, and you'll be fine.
Yep. I'll go so far to say is to write 7 to 10 episodes in advance, so you have at least a discussion, find your people that make you comfortable. Like, we were so fortunate to fall into this idea, Stu and I were here, and then we had May on as a guest, and like, you're a permanent fixture. That just kind of happened organically.
Well, what that leads into is if you've got, let's say, for example, you've decided I'm going to do a podcast on whatever your subject matter chosen may be. Mm-hmm. Write your episodes or have ideas for X amount of episodes, release on a regular schedule, right? Yep. People expect us now to release on a Monday morning. That is when UberCube 7 a.m. Mm-hmm. Those episodes get released, right? All of the, even just look at the other Cube podcasts, right? Lucky Paper, Squares That Cube. Get yourself on that regular schedule. This is when we release. This is when you'll get a new episode. Build it into a routine. And the listening will take care of itself.
And a rhythm actually matters to this idea. It doesn't have to be 1 week. It can be 2 weeks. We're going to release a podcast monthly. People will come to you. Don't get upset about your numbers. Don't look at Lucky Paper Radio actually covers a lot where they talk about they don't get overly concerned about their numbers. I think that matters. Don't let the numbers reflect how well you're doing or whatever. Just learn from it, right?
Especially now, this is 2024. Right? Technology is so prevalent. Number of podcasts, the number of YouTube channels, whatever the case may be. Exposure is, it's never been easier, but it's never been more difficult, right? There's lots of ways to promote yourself. You can promote yourself on Twitter. You can promote yourself on Facebook groups, promote yourself however. But it's very, very difficult just purely by the number of other podcasts and other content creators that are out there to kind of separate yourself a little bit, right? So don't worry too much about that. Just focus on making good content. Focus on talking about things that you find enjoyable, that you're passionate about. If you're doing, especially with things like YouTube, if you're a vintage cube content creator, that's what you're going to focus on, right? Have passion about it. Figure out a way to talk about about your subject matter. Again, I'll talk about Benny Hills, right? Benny is, for my money, one of the best vintage cube content creators out there. Very capable when it comes to talking about the discussions, talking about the play lines, breaking things down. Louis Scott Vargas does it just, in my opinion, he is the absolute creme de la creme when it comes to breaking down all of the little decision points that he has to make. Reed Duke, Caleb D, Caleb G, like all of those guys that do that at the top level. J Bro, like you name one, name them all. Chill, when I've watched Chill do Vintage Cube or any kind of Cube content, they're always so capable of breaking down all those decisions and showing that passion about it. That by itself, good audio, you're set.
My next question I have is top bucket list, right? Are there any topics that you haven't covered yet, but you're eager to dive into?
Yeah, the Doom Cube when it finishes.
Yep, I've got this huge list. So what I do is I write with all the energy that I have comprised. I actually write more episodes and I present them to May and Stu and ask them what they think about it. Right? Does it vibe with you? And one of them that we're actually working on right now is kind of the Bridge to Cube episode, where I put a poll out on Twitter and I reached out to all the Discords and asked them, is Vintage Cube the enabler? We're going to talk about this during the episode, not today, but is it what you use to bridge over into the idea of Cube?
And I love this question. And I will say that it's one of those, it elicited an incredible emotional response from the community. Again, we're not going to dive into that now. That is definitely a future episode, which I am so excited about. But I love those kinds of interactions with the community. Like those are awesome.
I like the community response episodes. May, I have a question for you as we wrap up here. How has hosting UberCube changed you personally or professionally?
Well, ever since that I've been on, it really feels like that I'm part of a community in a way that I didn't really have before, and it's changed the way that I function as a person, I suppose, because it feels like that I actively have something worth sharing and being proud of, and a community that I'm a part of. And that's not really something that I had before. So,
As May does, she always puts a nail in the coffin, and I don't have nothing.
Yeah, I can't top that. Forget about it.
Thanks, May.
you're welcome.
This is why we try and get May to go last, because it's like, well, how do I follow that, right? There's no way.
All right. Well, thank you guys for supporting us. This is our 100th episode. It's super indulgent. I hope that we answered some of your questions and that maybe you didn't really get anything out of it, but you got the human aspect out of it, right? That was my ultimate goal with this episode is we talk a lot in front of these microphones, but I wanted you to meet us as humans, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then other than that, Stu is going to take us to the socials.
So, to our Patreons, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nick LaPointe, Preston, Sam McKenna, and Stephen Conifal. I want to give a big shout out in particular to Stephen, and a thank you for, he sent us over a little gift. I won't go into too much detail about it, but it included a box of Ikoria, and to cut a long story short,
which I romple-stomped everybody with.
Basically, Anthony opened all the good cards. I didn't tend to open a whole lot of good cards, but it was a really nice experience for us to be able to hang out, get our group together here locally in North Carolina, just do a little Ikoria draft. Had a good time. Stephen, thank you so much. I love you. And again, to all of our Patreons, cannot thank you enough for the continued support. It really does go a long way. I know I keep mentioning this, but I think the microphone stand's going to come in the next 6 months or so.
Yes, you got 3 microphones now. Carry on. Oh, so we want to say thank you. Well, I'm pointing to the names of Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nicholas LaPointe, Stephen Conifal, Preston, and Samuel McKenna. We would love to get some more Patreons. Help us get the lights on. Stu can actually change out his mic stand, a.k.a. I actually pay the bills around here.
It's
UberCube.
really looking bad.
Yeah,
right
so I can
now.
actually start paying May and Stu for their time. That'd be great. But yeah, we're currently we're in the black now, so that's good. Keep going.
Good. Thank you. If you're looking to either get into discussion about Cube, maybe you're new, maybe you're an experienced Cube person, go check out the MTG Facebook drafting page at facebook.com/groups/MTGCube, where our resident Anthony Adams is
Hammer.
Is an administrator over there. All right, go help him flex his. But great page. A lot of discussion going on there. Again, if you're new, if you're experienced, whatever the case may be, a lot of cool discussion there. If you enjoy the show, please go and give us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Really goes a long way to get us out there to the community. You can also support us using our ultasleeves.com/UberCube affiliate link for 5% off your purchase, as well as our inkedgaming.com/UberCube affiliate link for dice bags, mouse pads, all kinds of custom and large volume products available for your Magic experience. If you want to reach out to us with either a short little comment, hit us up at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. Or if you've got a longer comment, maybe you want to complain about an episode or tell us how much you love the episode or the podcast or May, you can hit us up at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. And as always, the Discord is absolutely popping out of control right now. I actually recently, this was really cool, set up a forum for Cube. Originally, you were going to be the Cube Doctor. You remember that?
Yeah, we did a whole thing.
Cube Doctor. That was such a cool idea.
UberCube Clinic.
Yeah, that was such a cool idea. But we have a forum set up on our Discord right now, and we're getting activity there already. So if you've got either your own Cube that you're looking for some advice with, or if you just want to give some advice to other Cube curators, come check it out.
And May, you remind me of the babe.
What babe?
Babe with the power.
Babe with the power.
Power of voodoo.
What you do?
You do?
Who what?
You do.
Remind me of the babe.
That's all my baby.
As hard as babe could.
What do I cue?
My babies lost their lands.
No. Seriously.
And with that, we're going to say what we always say here at UberCube, which is
Happy 100.